You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Let's talk about the most fascinating news developing right now in the Pacific Northwest. We call it Front Page. And back to share her takes on the top news of the day is KUOW politics editor Kat Smith. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's always lovely. And, you know, we've done this a few times before. I feel like you and I get pretty wonky and nerdy about stuff, which I really enjoy.
All right, let's nerd out.
Yeah, let's nerd out. Let's get to our top story.
These folks who live in the neighborhoods and have to see this every single day, they deserve to feel safe and supported in their own communities, not only during World Cup or major events, but for the time that they are there.
That's former Seattle City Council member Tanya Wu speaking at a Public Safety Committee meeting yesterday. So key members of Seattle City Council appear to be getting fed up with how the city handles public drug use and other low-level crimes. And that frustration, Kat, it's coming to a head when, you know, just over a month away from now, FIFA is going to be here with the World Cup, fans from all over the world. That's going to bring tens of thousands of tourists here. But pockets of the city, like Little Saigon, they have very serious visible problems with open drug use. We know the 12th and Jackson hotspot, of course. You know, the concern is how will all of this look, right, for people coming to town, visiting Seattle for the first time? And I think also just for, you know, the everyday lives of these community members who are confronted with this, as Tanya Wu was saying. So you watched this Public Safety Committee meeting yesterday, Kat. Yep. What happened?
It was kind of a humdinger. The Public Safety Committee got a presentation from city officials about enforcement of the city's drug law that went into effect in 2023. And top line, drug arrests were up almost 50% last year, while referrals to diversion services were down 30%. And
oh, wow.
It's a little weird to see diversion referrals falling. The city's throwing a lot of resources at these non-jail interventions for drug users. I'll talk more about that in a second, but I just want to recap for people some background about how drug possession in the city works, because it's complicated, but it is important why we do things the way we do, because it's confusing. Okay, so basically the city drug law that we're talking about here was passed in response to the state Supreme Court's Blake decision. It wiped out felony drug possessions in the state, and the legislature reclassified simple drug possession as a misdemeanor. This might sound familiar to people if you've listened to KUOW.
Yeah, that was
a lot.
A whole saga. Yes.
Yep, and then the city of Seattle adopted its own version of the state law into its municipal code so that it could prosecute these low-level drug crimes in city court for the first time. The law prioritizes diversion, which is like sending someone arrested for doing drugs in public through programs designed to keep a person out of jail and instead help them access housing or treatment programs. So yesterday, city officials, from the police department, diversion program leads, they briefed the city council's Public Safety Committee on how enforcement of the drug law is going. And I will say that, Public Safety Committee head Bob Kettle actually opened the meeting on a very dire note. He said the city's new drug law has been a failure, and he set the tone on a dire note. He used the example of the open-air drug and stolen goods markets that is really visible in Little Saigon that we talked about at the top to illustrate this point. But he also said, this is a problem in neighborhoods all over the city. It's not just in Little Saigon. And so I'll just race through some of the data that the city council members were presented with that shows that arrests were way up and that referrals to diversion programs are way down, like we talked about.
Yeah.
So this data compares 2024 to 2025. And during that time, arrests rose by almost 50%, like we said, and diversion referrals cratered. Now, the question is why? Why did diversion fall during that time when this law is supposed to prioritize diversion?
And I just want to underline that because that was a huge debate. There was this kind of limbo time after the Blake decision at the state level where the city of Seattle hadn't passed its own version of like what the city attorney can do when it comes to prosecuting drug crimes. And there was a lot of debate. The city council at one point had, failed to pass the law because enough people said there's not enough emphasis on, enough of the council members said there's not enough emphasis on diversion here. And so then the version that ultimately passed, making it a gross misdemeanor, possession and use in the city, it really was all about this diversion idea, that would be the first option in most cases, that there would be money attached for, this sort of the programs that would help people and actually, supposedly make some kind of a dent in repeat offenses and things like that, and actually help people, get clean. But what we're hearing here and from this data, things went in the opposite direction. Like those diversions actually plummeted, which is pretty shocking.
Strange. So there were three reasons why diversions were falling. Number one, lots of new cops got hired between 2024 and 2025, and they were not all trained to make deferrals. That now is improving. Sean Barnes, the police chief, was there, and he said this has been a problem. We're changing it, so they expect. They expect referrals to start going in the other direction.
So they just didn't know how they were supposed to approach that.
Right.
Okay.
Second problem, the care team couldn't make referrals to diversion programs either. That's the non-police response team that deploys to behavioral health calls downtown. They were blocked from performing certain tasks because of contract issues with the police union. But that's also changed with the latest police contract. So the care team is now allowed to start making those referrals. So officials think that this is also going to increase those diversion stats. There was a third reason, too, and this one is strange. Diversion case managers got very overloaded and couldn't take on more referrals at a certain point, which to me is interesting because this was a major concern when the drug law was being debated in 2023, that service provider networks wouldn't be ready for an influx of referrals. And it looks like we're seeing that did come to pass. The implication during the presentation here was that service programs are going to need more resources, presumably from the city, to scale up. And that actually might be kind of a tough sell at the city council right now.
Yeah, I mean, Councilmember Maritza Rivera sounded very skeptical about additional resources going towards lead law enforcement assisted diversion. Mm-hmm. Here's a cut from Maritza Rivera.
We're in a budget deficit. So are there other things that we can do to address the problem? That's where I'm at.
It is odd to me that diversion is going down. That was a concern when this law was initially passed, just in terms of capacity wise. And so if, all of this is actually coming to pass, that capacity was not significant or not sufficient to address what were the ambitions of the city to focus on diversion, it's a little bit of a catch-22 if you're like, well, we don't have any more money to spend, but also we recognize that the capacity isn't sufficient. I just don't know where to go from there.
The whole situation seems like a catch-22, and it's so much bigger than this World Cup timeline.
Let's move on to our next story on Front Page.
The GEO Group chose to operate this facility in Washington, and the GEO Group makes a lot of money from this facility, and they must follow our law, therefore.
Okay, that is Attorney General Nick Brown, who was standing outside of the Northwest ICE Processing Center in Tacoma yesterday. Washington leaders say that they want state health inspectors to be granted access to the immigration detention facility there in Tacoma. The state filed a motion in federal court on Tuesday seeking an injunction to stop GEO Group from barring inspections. The State Department of Health has received thousands of complaints about conditions at the facility, and inspectors have reportedly tried to enter 10 times since 2023, but have been denied access, yes. I think the most recent time that they were trying to gain access, which kind of created the impetus for this filing, was, they were looking at reports of water at the facility, drinking water smelling badly. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we say that they've had complaints about conditions. So this is not going to be the first time that the state meets GEO Group in court, Kat. What do you think about the stakes here?
It's a private business contracting with the federal government, and this is a very lucrative time to be in this kind of business, right? Detaining immigrants under Donald Trump is a fast-growing slice of the economy right now, like it or not. Companies like GEO Group have a lot to gain by this expansion, this immigration crackdown, this expansive immigration crackdown that Trump is pursuing. So companies like this likely want to protect their investments, and keeping mum about conditions on the inside, whatever they're like, is probably better for their bottom line. There's a lot of money at stake here. And when you think about a private prison, unlike a government-run facility, they're not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests like a federal or state prison might be. So it's harder always for the public to learn about what goes on in these private facilities. They're generally pretty secretive. We've heard reports from inmates in this Tacoma facility. We've done a lot of coverage about it at KUOW that the population inside ballooned last year from a few hundred detainees to 1,500, which is roughly the capacity of the jail. Our colleague Liz Jones published a documentary about life in that facility last year. And one of the things she learned from advocates was that people who complain about the conditions sometimes get transferred to other states. So complain and you get sent somewhere else.
Which possibly means that you're further away from
your family,
your social network, your support
your
system.
lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this company that we're talking about that runs the Tacoma facility, KUOW Group, clearly does not want people to know what's going on there. Lots of details have leaked out, which the company sometimes has denied. More often, it just doesn't comment. There have been complaints about staffing, delayed medical treatment, mistreatment of inmates. Recently, when state inspectors tried to get in, I think it was on their 9th try. You mentioned their 10th try. On their 9th try, they tried to get in, and KUOW Group said they had to go through ICE to get access. So the state requested from ICE, didn't hear back.
Yeah, just radio silence.
KUOW Group has learned, it's leaned on this contract that it has with the federal government in its pushback of Washington state's law about these health inspections. It says the state can't regulate a federal contractor. So they're operating in this in-between kind of gray area between jurisdictions to dodge potential accountability.
But they've already lost
how it looks
in court on that issue. So the Washington legislature passed in 2023 this law that requires certain conditions to be met at these immigrant jails. So like clean clothes, hygiene items, heat and AC, things like that. And then they said health inspectors are supposed to be granted access. So KUOW Group then sued, saying the state doesn't have jurisdiction over a federal contractor. But Washington won that case in the 9th Circuit.
Right.
Now, the KUOW Group could try to appeal that up, perhaps go to the Supreme Court with that. But right now, the legal precedent is in the favor of Washington state right now. I think that is part of the frustration that you heard from the Attorney General and the governor yesterday. You know, one of the interesting things that's happening at the same time as, this fight in Washington state around the Tacoma facility is that the Trump administration is fighting battles over whether it can pursue this policy that started last June of indefinitely detaining every immigrant that it picks up for supposed violations and in attempt to deport them. So they had this mandatory detention policy that started last year. Now, that has meant that immigrants, even if they've been in the country for a really long time, didn't have the option of bond to be able to bail out and, while they're awaiting their hearings, be out in the community. So that's another reason that you saw the population of these detention facilities really balloon. Now, immigrants have been challenging this. They have been challenging their own detention because they can't bond out in federal court. So there are 30,000 cases, habeas challenges is what they're called, across the country of people saying I should be able to pay a bond to bail out, basically. Now, that has also led to a challenge at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which just ruled yesterday that this policy of mandatory detention is illegal. Now, there have been other circuit courts that ruled in a different way, so the disagreement at the circuit level is probably going to mean a Supreme Court review. Just all of this, like huge swirling questions around the future of not just the ICE Tacoma facility, but also how immigrants are detained nationally.
And you mentioned that Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals fight, just to go back to something that you said.
Yeah, that's for the Washington, to get access and to require
the health
certain,
inspectors.
certain standards.
To go back to that, we're going to see in a matter of weeks here whether KUOW Group is going to be able to get this picked up by the Supreme Court. They have until either mid-May or mid-June to appeal to the court for this. And so I've seen different reports in the media. So we're going to find out in a matter of weeks if they continue fighting.
Yep, that's right. Nina Shapiro is one person who's talked to detainees at the ICE facility in Tacoma, an example of conditions that have led to complaints include being served raw chicken with blood on their trays, not getting, meals on time, Again, the foul-smelling water was the most recent reason for health inspectors to try to get in. But the lack of timely medical care seems to be the most frequent complaint that comes out of that facility. So we'll keep watching this. And moving to our third story on the front page.
Meta and Microsoft announced a combined 23,000 job cuts, and that speaks to how tech giants are doing more with fewer workers.
So some local tech companies you might have heard of, Microsoft and Amazon, along with Google and Meta, they are all scheduled to release their quarterly earnings reports today, and just after our show ends, actually, around 1 o'clock Pacific. So all eyes are on how these companies' revenue is growing, Kat, versus what they're spending on capital investments for these AI data centers. I mean, for Microsoft, this is just a really crazy moment. We saw earlier this week that they announced a retooling of their partnership with OpenAI. They ended the exclusivity deal that allows now OpenAI to basically sell its tools independent of Microsoft Azure. It also changed that retooling, changed some revenue sharing elements. Microsoft is ending its revenue sharing side of things. OpenAI's revenue sharing will be capped. And we haven't talked yet on this show about the big Microsoft workforce reduction effort, offering buyouts to roughly 7% of the workforce. You'll remember Microsoft laid off 15,000 people last year.
Oh, yeah.
They're really the folks in Redmond there, they're really trying to recover from a pretty disastrous earnings report in January, which saw actually really strong revenue growth, but investors' reaction was really terrible and the stock plummeted roughly 12%. Wiping out hundreds of billions of dollars in market value because they didn't like what they saw when it came to the reliance on OpenAI for revenue, when it came to capital expenditures, and how people were adopting, or in this case, not adopting, Copilot, the AI tool that Microsoft created. So really hoping to change things, Microsoft is, with this earnings call. I mean, there's just a lot of things swirling in the tech world. What are you watching?
You know, when I think about these layoffs that are convulsing the tech sector right now, I do have to remind myself that companies got really bloated during the pandemic. And some of these layoffs, you know, they're making everything very AI focused, but I do think that there is some cover for reducing workforce from pandemic bloat so that they can, you know, stock up on AI people. Meta, for example, certainly has some pandemic-related bloat. If you remember, they changed their name from Facebook to Meta so they could go all in on the metaverse, whatever that was. So now they're doing another big pivot to AI.
Don't you remember the little avatar that Mark Zuckerberg made?
The legless avatars? Whatever the metaverse is. I just, you know, some of this stuff is a little... Okay, here's a good example. Wall Street Journal had an item that Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's going all in on AI, right? They want to be AI native. Mark Zuckerberg is building his own AI CEO, which sounds like he's going to put himself out of a job, but really it just like looks stuff up for him. So he's not exactly putting himself out of a job yet, but Meta wants their workforce to train AI to do their own jobs. So people's performance reviews are now tied.
So he's showing people, I'm training an AI.
Look, me, I'm building an AI
too.
CEO. Their performance reviews are now tied to how they're training the AI. They're logging, this is really creepy. They log keystrokes now, and they're watching how the employees are training the AIs. Are you being a good trainer of the AI? And employees don't like this. They think it's weird. And it's like, you're training an AI to do your job. Like, yikes.
The Wall Street Journal pointed out, I mean, first of all, there's just like hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on these data centers, right, to try to compete in the AI space. And at the same time, in order to show Wall Street that you're slimming down, that you are, you know, really focused on this idea of AI in the future, you have to start, lowering your staffing. Like you have to find a way to cut the number of heads that you're, paying salaries to. So something I found interesting in the Wall Street Journal recently was that there is this push to reduce headcount, to have, earnings per employee look better on the balance sheet for investors. And so there is this, effort to kind of slim down, again, layoffs at Meta, the reduction at Microsoft, things like that. At the same time, there is this sort of countervailing problem with layoffs tied to AI because public perception of that is very bad. There's already been this big pushback against AI data centers and the idea that there is this rapacious use of electricity and water and in service of AI. As the public also starts to see AI as being a replacement for the worker, there is real consequences for like political and social pushback against the AI becoming as big as it is. They will have a problem citing these data centers. They will have a problem, with regulations around where they can exist and how they can exist. So they're sort of stuck between performing for investors in the short run and making sure that the public doesn't see AI as the enemy in the long run. And I find that to be kind of a fascinating tension. Usually we like to get to a kicker on Front Page, but we just ran out of time because we were having so much fun talking about
the biggest bummers in the world,
the potential future of a depleted labor picture in the Seattle area.
This is what happens when you have me on your show.
This is what happens, Kat. But I really enjoy nerding out with you. As
I love
usual.
talking about bummer stuff.
So,
it energizes me.
Thank you so much. Kat Smith, politics editor at KUOW. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.